Regularity in the IA module is the name of this module of the paper Morphology and Syntax in the EPG Pathshala Linguistics course. Welcome to EPG Pathshala. The person welcoming you is Probal Dasgupta. I teach at the Indian Statistical Institute in Kolkata. In this module of the Morphology and Syntax course, we will continue to look at the comparison between the IA or item and arrangement approach and the IP or item and process approach, with special reference to the artificial international language Esperanto, which has been designed for maximal ease of learning and which has therefore been streamlined. It has no exceptions. In the last module, we looked at the fact that Esperanto invites the use of item and process apparatus. In this module, we shall look at exactly how the item and arrangement approach functions vis-a-vis Esperanto and other extremely regular structures. In the recent modules, we have introduced two crucial concepts, inflection and derivation, and told you that there are inflectional endings and derivational affixes. There are two kinds of affixes. In the item and arrangement approach, the morpheme theory, these things are all regarded as being on the same footing. Correspondingly, they have other artificial concepts, the stem concept for inflection and the base concept for derivation, which you will have to learn in order to understand the books and articles about complicated affixation systems such as that of Sanskrit and other classical languages. So we have to teach you what a stem is and what a base is, even though the theory of our main line of teaching does not accept these as fundamental concepts. The stem in an inflected word is that which remains when you subtract the inflectional ending. The base in a derivative or a derived word is that which remains after you have subtracted the derivational affix. What does this mean in practice? In a language like English or Esperanto, it is a very elementary question. Kuristo, a runner, has a derivational affix ist. So when you take away isto, you're left with kur, which is therefore the base of the word kuristo. English has the word runner, which has the derivational affix Subtracting it, you obtain the residue run. Run is the base of runner. If you take inflected words, English running is an inflected word. Subtract the inflectional ending ing and you get run, the stem of running. In Esperanto, kuras is an inflected word. It means runs. He, she, it, they run. Present tense. And if you subtract the inflectional ending as, you get the stem, kur. It looks ridiculous, and if there were only languages like English and Esperanto at stake, no theorist would even dream of distinguishing stem and base. Why then make the distinction? To see the point of making the distinction, it is useful to go to a language like Sanskrit. The inflectional chart for the word manas, mind, shows you that you've got the following: manah, manasi, manansi, manasa, manobhya, manobhih, manase, manobhya, manobhyah, manasa, etc. In that chart, when you sit and count how many different stems can be seen, you will discover that they take a word like manas or yashas take 4 different forms. Manah, manas, manam, mano. There are 4 stems. Now, some of these contrasts can be thrown out because they are due to automatic alternation. Mano and mana are in a state of automatic alternation. So mano can be regarded as a variant of mana. That means the noun manas has 3 stems. Mana, manas, and manam. 3 distinct stems. Now when you look at bases, from words like manas and yashas, you can derive words like manasvi, thoughtful, yashasvi, famous, manomaya, mental, yashovan, famous. How many bases did you find? You found the bases manas and mano, or you found yashas and yasho, 2 bases corresponding to 3 stems. You will say that's not an earth-shaking result. 3 is not so much bigger than 2. It doesn't look like a huge difference. We are dealing with an elementary course here and can't give you a really massive example involving 5, 6, 7 forms, because that would involve showing you 50, 60, 70 words. But please take our word for it. When you survey a language like Sanskrit or Latin, if you take each element and look at whether it has a greater diversity of stems or a greater diversity of bases, you will always find that the diversity of stems tends to be greater than that of bases. English itself gives you data for this. We have given you an exercise in which you get a chance to do this for yourself. You can satisfy yourself that stems and bases behave differently. There are more stems for each inflected word than there are bases. All this is fine. Maybe it's useful to know this. Does this convince you that stem and base are fundamentally different concepts? No, it does not, and it should not. These are convenient words to name the residue which you get after you've taken away the inflectional ending or the derivational affix. That's all. They boil down to distinguishing inflection and derivation. Even that distinction is not fundamental, because inflection is that part of morphology whose features are drawn from syntax. So inflection versus derivation is merely syntax versus morphology. None of this is fundamental. What is fundamental to the item and arrangement approach is really root and affix. Unfortunately, because the morpheme theory denies the fundamentality of the contrast between root and affix, it treats everything as equally toy-like, or everything as equally fundamental. If you want to think of stem and base as toys, then inflection and derivation are also toys. Then root and affix are also toys. That is how it looks to the morpheme theoretical eye. In fact, root versus affix is the only really fundamental distinction that the morpheme theory makes. Why is it really fundamental? Why are we saying this? What is our basis for saying this? When you look at affixes in the item and arrangement theory, remember that they have this perverse tendency to use replaceives in order to make sure that all inflectional and derivational changes come out as if they were affixes. Remember that for English, past tenses like sang and rang based on sing and ring, the item and arrangement approach says there is a special replacive morph implementing the past tense. In other words, sang is really sing plus a replacement of e by a. Rang is really ring plus a replacement of e by a. Recall from earlier modules that this is how the morpheme theory handles past tenses. Given that this is so, given that the morpheme theory is committed to saying that some affix morphemes have replacive morphs among their exponents, it should be possible to find root morphemes for which there are sometimes replacive allomorphs. We defy the morpheme theorist to show us a single root morpheme in any language of the world, present or past, that is manifested by a replacive morph in any environment. It is so perverse an idea that we need to spend some time explaining to you what does not exist. You need to imagine a language which is a little bit like English, but is different. Let us call it English. In this English language, everything else is exactly like English, except that when you look at the past tense ending id, as in stated, or the participial ending ing, as in stating, there is a very peculiar fact about this language, English. All other verbs sound like English verbs. Going, coming, sitting, standing, everything is exactly like English. But English has the special property that you don't say eating and drinking. Instead of saying eating, you say eng. Instead of saying drinking, you say ong. Likewise, when the past tense id wants to apply to the root that means eating, the past tense id turns into ed. So in that language, in order to say ate, you say ed. And in order to say drank, you say odd. So in that language, English, eng means eating, ong means drinking, ed means ate, perform the action of eating, and odd means drank, performed the action of drinking. Now, obviously, such a language is very odd, to quote from what I was just saying to you. It is impossible to imagine a real human language in which affixes change their vowels in order to show that there is a root hiding there. You never find roots behaving like this. A word that means eat or drink never disappears and becomes a mere change in the vowel of an affix, so that the whole word looks like an affix with its vowel slightly twisted to show that there is a hiding root there. This never happens. The point we are making is, we who have a process theory of morphology defy a morpheme theorist to either show us a language where this kind of odd phenomenon exists, or to give us a theoretical explanation in terms of morpheme theory that tells us why you never have a root morpheme with a replacive allomorph. If you want to allow your theory to postulate affix morphemes with a replacive allomorph, why does your theory not allow there to be root morphemes with such a bizarre allomorph? If you don't postulate them for root morphemes, why are you postulating them for affix morphemes? Stepping back from this way of putting the difficulty, what we need to say is that the item and arrangement theory understates the importance, understates the fundamentality of the distinction between roots and affixes. As a result, in their theory, all these concepts look like they're on the same footing. That is the main difficulty of the item and arrangement theory and the way they do this. We are looking at the distinction between the morphology of compounds and the syntax of the corresponding constructions. We begin with English, where the distinction is obvious. Compare the sentence, "We wonder why you undershot the target," which uses the compound undershot, with the sentence, "We wonder why you shot under the target," which uses the construction shot under. You see, the meanings are different. Here am I with a rifle. There is the target 300 yards away. When you say I undershot the target, you probably mean my bullet landed 200 yards from me and 100 yards before the target. I didn't reach the target. When you ask why I shot under the target, you're trying to say I hit the board that I was aiming at, but I didn't hit the point I was aiming at. My bullet went to the lower part of the board. It was under the target. Shooting under the target is a very different kind of shooting from undershooting the target. This is very obvious in a language like English. Likewise, if you compare, they were told to overlook the fence. Overlook is a compound. With the sentence, they were told to look over the fence, where look over is a syntactic construction. The difference in meaning is again obvious. Overlooking the fence means other people have constructed a fence that they should not have constructed. They, some border security force type people, they were requested to ignore it. One way to say ignore is overlook. They were told to overlook the fence. But if you say they were told to look over the fence, that means stand like that and look over the fence. That is a different idea completely from overlook. Now you'd expect that such thing would never happen in Esperanto, that compounds and their corresponding constructions in Esperanto would be identical. Well, when you look at actual examples of Esperanto compound words, you begin to develop doubts about this expectation. Compare li curis post vi, he ran after you, a syntactic construction, curis ran post after, with the morphological compound post curi in the sentence, li post curis vin, which is translated into English as he chased you, but literally it means he after ran you. After run is the Esperanto compound for chasing. What is the difference, if any, between li curis post vi and li post curis vin? You see, the difference is that curi post can mean run 3 hours later than. You run, you jog in the morning, you go back to your house. 3 hours later, he comes to the same place and he runs. That is one way for us to say he ran after you, li curis post vi. But if I say li post curis vin with a single word post curis, a compound word, that is not a possible sentence to describe the situation that you run in the morning and then you go back home and 3 hours later he comes out and then he runs in the same place. Post curi, a compound, requires a single meaning. It requires a single situation to be described with some unity in the situation. If you jog in the morning and then go away and 3 hours later a man comes out and jogs in the same place, there is no unity of the situation. Their jogging 3 hours later is arbitrary and has no connection with your having jogged in the morning. As a result, it is inappropriate to say li post curis vin if his running is several hours after your running and is completely disconnected. So even in Esperanto, even in a streamlined artificial language where logic is everything, a compound word and the corresponding syntactic construction that you can make by taking out the pieces of the compound word and using them as separate words in the syntactic construction do not have the same meaning. The differences are less extreme than what you see in English look over versus overlook, or in English shoot under versus undershoot. But the differences are still perfectly real and can be demonstrated in example after example. Now, what is there to look at? In La Iuna knabo ploris post la tertremo, the young boy cried after the earthquake, which is a possible sentence, and the impossible sentence where you try to turn cry after into a compound word, and you try to say La Iuna knabo, the young boy, post ploris, after cried, la tertremon, the earthquake. Why is it impossible? What is going on here? You would only be able to say such a sentence, La Iuna knabo post ploris la tertremon, if after crying was an activity that could affect the earthquake. Imagine that there is a young boy with the magical ability to bring the dead back to life. He goes to the site of an earthquake and he after cries it. And the moment he after cries it, millions of people wake up from the dead and come out of the bowels of the earth, those who'd been killed by the earthquake. In such a magical situation, one that you're imagining, it becomes possible to say, La iunac nabo post ploris latet tremon, because then that action of after crying magically affects the earthquake and reverses its effects. If you don't have such an imaginary situation, there is no occasion to make up such a compound and use it. So people speaking Esperanto never say post plori, to after weep or after cry. After having made that point, we now wish to make some detailed comments on material that we began to cover in the preceding module concerning the strategy shadow effect. We told you in the last module that the strategy shadow effect holds in Esperanto. It does indeed hold. From Germanisto, a person who specializes in the study of German, you cannot go further and say Germanististo, a person who specializes in other persons who specialize in the study of German. However, there are some very important exceptions to the strategy shadow effect. The exceptions exist in lots of languages, but we'll take up the Esperanto cases because it makes it very easy to discuss the material. Consider pra-avo, great-grandfather, derived from avo, grandfather. It turns out that pra can be used again and again. You can say pra-avo, which means great-great-grandfather. You can say pra-pra-pra-avo, great-great-great-grandfather. In the other direction, nepo grandson, pra-nepo grandson, pra-pra-nepo, great-great-grandson, you can go on. It is not only a matter of pra, great. Consider the way people talk about white men going to America in 1492, beginning with Columbus. Everything that happened in the Americas before Columbus reaches those shores in 1492 are called pre-Columbian events. In Esperanto, the word used is antau Columba. Antau means before, and Columbo is the name for Columbus. Imagine that you are talking about the first people who went to the Americas, the first inhabitants, called aboriginals, tribals, whatever term you use. Their cultures are called pre-Columbian cultures. Suppose in talking about them, you need to refer to geological events that affected the Americas before human beings began to settle there at all. Now, since the cultures you're describing are pre-Columbian cultures, antau Columbae culturoi, you have to describe those geological events as antau Columbae events, pre-Columbian. If you then, assigning the term pre-Columbian to the geology, want to go even further back to the origin of the planet Earth or the origin of the solar system, you can add a few more pre's and do pre as many times as you need to in such a series. The language doesn't stop you. You can keep saying antau as many times as necessary, just as for great-great-great-grandfathers and grandsons, you can do pra. At this point, our module asks you to do an exercise. We will not cheat and tell you how to do it. In order to make the exceptional possible, remember that the exceptional forms are inaccessible by ordinary word formation strategies. What we emphasized in the previous module is the details of the word formation strategy format that make it a theorem, a strategy shadow theorem that you can derive from the mathematics of the word formation strategy. Given that theorem, it should be impossible to violate the strategy shadow effect. How come human languages allow it at all? In what way does the theory, the whole word morphology theory, handle the fact that there are some exceptions To start with, how do we state the exceptions? How do we create word formation strategies that find a backdoor or a secret hatch to let them in? That is what we give you this exercise for. It turns out that there is a trick. It's an expensive trick, but there is a trick. It's a bit like, suppose you've constructed a barbed wire fence to prevent intruders from coming into a place. And it's fairly effective for those who try to climb over the barbed wire fence. They don't have special equipment. They get hurt badly and they don't try. But if you want to get over a barbed wire fence, there's always a helicopter. A helicopter is expensive, but there are helicopters and they will certainly go over barbed wire. Likewise, for strategy shadows, to get around the strategy shadow effect, you can make helicopter word formation strategy. What are these exceptions and why does language allow them to exist? Turns out this is not language, this is mathematics, and it's a special sector of mathematics. When you consider certain mathematical relations like greater than and less than, they have the property that if you repeat the operation, if you try to do a double greater than, if you, instead of saying 5 is greater than 3, if you say 5 is greater than 3, or 5 is greater than 3, repeat it as many times as you want. Whatever you do with the repetitions, you end up meaning 5 is greater than 3. In other words, greater than is identical to greater than. Greater than is identical to greater than. For those mathematical relations that have this property, human language allows words to import the mathematical relation into language, and those words have the same property. What does this really mean? This means a bit like you are pushing some child up a flight of stairs. The child hasn't used stairs before, very young child. And you're a parenting figure or an uncle or aunt. And you say to the child, go up, up, up. And you keep saying up every time the child manages to do one step. Now obviously go up, up, up has the same meaning as go up. Obviously go up, 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 even 7 times, has the same meaning as go up. The meaning doesn't change. But you're talking to the child as if every time you say up, the child will do a single step. That is what you're really doing in your great-great-great-grandfather and similar examples. You are not stretching natural language, you are going into symbolism. You're doing something different. You appear to be violating the strategy shadow effect. Actually, you're not violating the strategy shadow effect. You're pretending to violate it in order to make a symbolic point. That is what is happening. And you're doing it by doing some hand-holding with mathematics. It's natural language borrowing material from mathematics. It is not human language itself sponsoring these special words. It is importing from mathematics certain mechanisms that are expressed in words. You're really using words as if they are mathematical symbols. When you do that, certain exceptions become possible because mathematics allows you to write redundantly greater than, and achieve the same meaning as a single greater than. Mathematics doesn't disallow a repeated use of greater than. It simply says you will read 3 greater thans or 5 greater thans or whatever number as being equivalent to a single greater than. So this is symbolic. Language itself does not allow you to violate the strategy shadow effect. But language allows you to borrow things from mathematics which appear to violate them. The last topic that we handle here has to do with other neighbors of morphology, the relationship between morphology and syntax, and the way grammatical features work both in the syntax and in the morphology. In order to understand how morphology is related to its neighbors, we need to especially now look at the borderline with syntax because we're about to make the jump from morphology into syntax. Recall from some lessons ago that a morphological process maps one word onto one word, and in doing so it uses a single variable. Remember that the single variable may be shown discontinuously. like C1, C2, C3, but it still corresponds to a single X. Whereas in contrast, syntax always uses two or more distinct substitutions. Syntax is involved with two or more variables. That is what syntax is about. It does the combining work. Morphology doesn't do any combining. In order to be able to say this explicitly and theoretically, we need the process approach, which denies the existence of morphemes. Because if we allow the concept of morpheme to get into our theory, we are back with the picture that words are composed of a lot of morphemes put together and sentences are composed of a lot of words put together. That picture is false because it uses the misleading notion putting together. There is no single kind of combining that happens both between the pieces of the word and between the pieces of a sentence. That is what we've been demonstrating by telling you about the strategy shadow effect. Even when you examine these apparent exceptions, you find no deviation from the fundamental fact that even those apparent violations of the strategy shadow effect never require the use of more than one variable in the word formation strategies that make these apparent exceptions possible. That is the fundamental thing to understand about these apparent exceptions to the strategy shadow effect, that the theoretical fundamentals are not affected at all by the data, even by the challenging and difficult data. So you're now ready to look at the fact that syntax really combines two or more things together. Syntax is about combining. Morphology is not about combining. This basic difference between syntax and morphology is obscured if you take the item and arrangement approach, if you take the morpheme concept seriously, if you allow it an official place in the theory of morphology, the theory of word formation. So let us summarize what we have done in this module, which is the last module dealing with Esperanto and the last module dealing with morphology. We have wrapped up our understanding of inflection and derivation by going further and showing you the use of two highly specialized terms in the theory of inflection and the theory of derivation. We have taught you how to use the term stem, which belongs to the theory of inflection, and the term base, which belongs to the theory of derivation. We then moved into compounding, which is another area of morphological study. We didn't exhaustively cover compounds, but we showed you examples of some compounds in Esperanto and English. And we stressed the fact that compounds do not have exactly the same content as the corresponding syntactic expressions, even in the artificial, streamlined, easy-to-learn logical language Esperanto. After showing you this about compounds, we moved back to strategy shadow, and we showed you that there is one corner of human language where there appear to be some violations of the strategy shadow effect. And we showed you the sense in which these are violations, the sense in which these are not violations, where they come from, how to handle them in the formal devices. When you go over the material, please make sure you read the e-text, and in this and other modules, never forget that the suggestions for further reading are an important part of what is being given to you. Never be afraid to ask critical questions. Get in touch with us if you have questions that you think we can answer. Thank you for your attention.